2, 1. This is Chargers Unleashed podcast. Here are your hosts, Dan Wolkenstein and Jake Hefner.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LAFB Network. Today's show, of course, being brought to you by BetOnline, Charger Bowl Family, Rock Solid Sports Memorabilia. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, preseason game number 1 for the Chargers is in the books. Some majority good takeaways. There are some things that we do need to go into a little bit more detail about. A couple question marks that are still out there and looming. Call it what you will, overreaction Sunday or overreaction Monday if we're talking about today. But overall, a lot of things that we expected to happen, a lot of things that we would hope that would happen for certain players. Even in a loss, I actually came away with a hell of a lot more positivity than I did negativity for this team. But anyways, how the hell was your weekend? Football's back.
Football is back, Jake. Yes. Welcome to Chargers Unleashed, ladies and gentlemen. We have a fun show today. My weekend was fantastic. I was able to watch football for the most part all weekend, which was great. Was able to go to SoFi with the Bolt fam and everyone else that was there. SoFi was great. The only thing I will say, Jake, is 7 o'clock start times for games. Like, that's rough, man. Like, getting home at like midnight, like, woof, not fun.
Hey, just be thankful it's on a Saturday, my friend.
That is true. This is true. So today, Jake, we get to go over all things Chargers versus Rams recap, the highs and lows, some of the kind of key takeaways from the game on Saturday. I think overall, Jake, off the top, I think we can all agree, like some of like the key performers, which we're going to get into all the specifics, but key takeaways that I took. I'm going to go rapid fire. Chris Rumph, stronger. Michael Bandy, Joe Reed, they're here making it interesting. Dean Leonard is a 7th round draft pick. Damon Lloyd still tackling. J.K. Scott still punting to the moon. And QB2
Josh Kelly look improved.
Josh Kelly and Isaiah Spiller both look pretty good. And missed tackles is still an issue. And did I miss anything?
I'm sure you did, but we're going to talk about it. So
cool. All right, Jake. So before we get into all the craziness, over or under, how many times Bryce Perkins' name is going to get brought up in the 2022 season once the regular season starts? I'm going to go over or under 1.5 mentions.
So you're saying this in like questioning if Bryce Perkins comes in to replace Matthew Stafford, essentially?
How many times will his name get brought up on a broadcast during the 2022 regular season? I mean, because honestly, he was like an MVP.
I mean, sure as hell looked like it with the way that he was eluding our tackles. You know what? You said 1.5 was the line?
Yeah.
Over an 18-week season? Yeah, I'll go over.
Okay.
I'll go over.
Love
what
it.
The hell?
Right. Well, pay the bills with the money you're about to win off the over, because I made it really low, but that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. At least you set the bar at a good spot. Anyways, BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports contests and events with first-to-market odds and lines. Find reviews and news for every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports information, from live in-game betting, props, and futures. Head on over to BetOnline today or use your mobile device, not your promo code. I'll tell the promo code in a second. Mobile device to join today and make your first sports bet using the now promo code BELIEVE50. That's BLEAV50 to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Okay, Jake, let's go ahead and kick this thing off. Charged with a coin toss and elect to receive. And with that, Joe Reed's actually kick returner, which I was like, oh, Joe Reed's sighting.
That was a nice surprise.
Here we go. First drive by Chase Daniel, starting off as QB1 in the first half. I think Easton Stick was second half. But you saw Joshua Kelly show kind of a new, rejuvenated Joshua Kelly. Physical, fast, more decisive, it seemed. You saw him catching stuff out of the backfield as well as rushing. And then Joe Reed, like 47-yard touchdown catch, which, given how much he's gone through as a player and off the field, not being able to get there, like you could tell how much that game meant to him. Joe Reed looked good. Joshua Kelly looked good. Offensive line looked good. I think that's where we first got to see Jamari Salyer, got to see Zion Johnson. Both of them looked pretty darn good as well. So starting off on offense, I would say Chargers look pretty good. And starting off on defense, Chargers look pretty good. And then it kind of changed.
Yeah, it kind of went through some ebbs and flows and then some drastic peaks and valleys. And then there were more valleys than there were peaks, of course. But overall from the first drive, Dan, I thought it looked all right. I thought that the Chargers were aggressive. The run game was working. Obviously, Joshua Kelly getting that opportunity to start 28 yards on 4 catches, I believe it was, and then 44 yards off of six carries. So decent for the time that he was in that game. Looked fresh, as it sounded like from his comments that he had earlier on last week, that everything that he's been doing, it looks early on that those returns are coming to fruition. And again, when we were talking about who's been the guy to lead the candidacy for the RB3 out of the rest of the pack between Kelly, Roundtree, Marks, and Letty Brown, he's been the one that's been in the lead. And again, not by a wide margin, but he was in the lead in practice. Definitely in this game, I think he has taken the reins of that. We'll see, obviously, what changes over the next 2 weeks, if anything changes. But moving on to Joe Reed, I mean, that 41-yard touchdown pass, and then to still be involved later on in the game, I thought that it was a great sign for him. Here we go.
Catches, 61 yards.
Yep. Here we go with this battle again between him and Michael Bandy. That's definitely going to make things interesting when we're coming to final cut decisions. But I thought it was great. I think, especially if you listen to him afterwards, as far as what that meant to him, just again, with essentially having 2021 as a lost season for him, and then just getting back healthy, among other things, and getting to start the first preseason game off that way, it's got to just boost his confidence a hell of a lot more moving forward.
100%. Quick correction, 3 catches, 28 yards for Joshua Kelly. But that's okay. Who's counting? So Joshua Kelly looked good. There are people
that are counting.
So starting off looked pretty good. And honestly, starting off defense looked pretty good too. I think they held the ran in Chris Rumph. That's when Chris Rumph got a sack on the next drive on defense.
Man.
Chris Rumph, let's talk about him. Again, we're going to go quickly over kind of just overall, and they'll get into individual players. But Chris Rumph overall looks strong. I think he had 2 tackles for a loss. Should have had 2 sacks. Ended up having 1 missed tackle on Bryce Perkins, which I think he and Egbule both had missed tackles on that later on. Chris Rumph, edge 3, it seems, along with Kyle Van Noy, depending on how things go at linebacker. But like Chris Rumph, people talked about him all the time. People talked about him off-season wise in terms of how much he's bulked up and how much he loves the game. We all know his personality. Came out strong, man. He had a bull rush that he had on that sack, and I was like, that's a grown man sack.
Yeah. Sorry, didn't want to sneeze in the mic. We are on live television, but I didn't want everybody to hear that. Dan, I was going to actually ask what your reaction, because considering that Chris Rumph, don't try to hide it because he's your boy.
Yep.
If anybody wants documentation of this, you go back from 2 years ago and you can actually find video footage of Dan Wolkenstein literally hitting the roof in his own home when the Chargers take Chris Rumph.
Okay, yeah, not literally. I cannot hit the roof. I can't jump that high.
Pretty close. Your excitement level was through the roof.
Yes, there we go.
So I'm sure you were elated when you were watching this taking place. But Dan, I tweeted it. The way that Chris Rumph was looking, the power that he has showed off, the added strength that has come through, that has not only shown up in preseason game number 1, but throughout practices as well. I mean, you could see that this was a different Chris Rumph. Joey Bosa has alluded to it to say he's not a string bean anymore. He's more like an asparagus. And then I tweeted out, I said, Chris Rumph may end up being a cucumber by the end of this game if that's what we're going by, judging on the sizes. But fantastic start for him. Great job when we're talking about guys that need to step up in this additional 3 and 4th position, especially just behind the Joey Bosa's, behind the Khalil Macks, at a very, very key position when we're talking about getting to the quarterback. And Chris Rumph, great start for him, showing out like that.
Yeah, had some tackles for loss, had the sack, should have had more. And honestly, it was amazing seeing him like literally flexing on folks as he's getting some of these tackles. You love to see it. Chris Rumph, again, He's not going up against the ones, which, again, if you're watching this game, literally there was like nobody on the starting offense or defense playing. So, yes, he's going up against the twos, but still, he's dominating the twos, which is what you want to see. Then, Jake, I guess this kind of gets into the rest of it, right? I think we saw, in no particular order, we saw Isaiah Spiller have a really good day. It was impressive. The numbers don't look it, but the eye test, I think it was like 10 rushes, 34 yards, something like that. Really good in pass protection, really good in terms of decisiveness as a runner. And then other people on offense, other than the linemen, of course, Michael Bandy, have a day, sir. I don't know if he's going to make this team purely because of who else is who's that receiver, but he is going to be on an NFL team, and that's going to hurt if it's not ours. 6 receivers is hard on a roster like this. It really is. And he's not going to beat out DeAndre Carter. But Michael Bandy looked good. I mean, he was open all day. He's kind of like the one like safety valve for both quarterbacks. And that whip route he had broke ankles. I got a video of it on Twitter. I was actually seeing it live. 10 yards separation with that whip route for the touchdown. So Michael Bandy, man, I think Matt Money Smith calls him the Bandy Man.
I like that.
He's impressed, dude. He's impressed throughout camp, and he's impressed week 1.
I mean, nobody took over really the race for wide receiver 6 in this matchup because Joe Reed and Michael Bandy were both performing at a very, very good clip.
Hold my beer. Hold my beer.
Exactly. That's basically what it felt like, essentially. Dan, I don't know, man. Michael Bandy to me is going to be very, very hard for the Chargers to cut. And I'm in the same boat and rooting for Joe Reed. Given the talent that we've seen throughout practice, and now you start off preseason game number 1 like this, I would really like to see the Chargers keep 6 receivers. I would. And here's my prediction, actually. You saw the work that Joe Reed got in kick return duties. I'd like to see, because you had both Bandy and Joe Reed both have very productive games in this one. I wonder if now, because we saw so much of this in practice, if now Bandy is going to get the kick return duties in game number 2 against the Cowboys, and just to see, okay, well, what type of separation can we make here? Because especially when we're talking about a wide receiver 6, sometimes it's going to come down to these contributions on special teams and who's going to be able to separate themselves. So Michael Bandy looked good, man. He looked very, very good. It's a bummer from the standpoint on the final drive of the game that Easton Stick was orchestrating, and that just ended up being a quote-unquote interception. But that one I don't actually blame on Bandy, given where the throw was, and just, how are you going to go away from that? The defender just so happened to be in the perfect position in order to take the ball away. But outside of that, dude, Bandy looked very, very good. And
7 receptions, 73 yards, touchdown, 11 targets.
It's going to be really hard to keep him off this roster.
Yeah, but I think
please don't make this the next Tyron Johnson. If I could just go out on a limb and say it.
The thing is going to be, if he makes this roster, then you're going to probably, if he's on the roster, there's probably only going to be 3 running backs, because I think there's a guy who also played on Saturday who didn't have the greatest game, Larry Roundtree, pretty ineffective. You saw some of the other running backs in there a bit. We saw Letty Brown get a few receptions. You saw, I think it was Kevin Marks, I think had either a missed drop or 2, which, again, in the preseason, you only have a finite amount of attempts to make an impact. And when the impacts you're making are negative, it doesn't bode well for the future game. And so I think in terms of like stock up, I think Letty Brown probably went up a little bit. I would say Isaiah Spiller and Joshua Kelly both went up a bit. I would say Larry Roundtree kind of went down maybe. Marks maybe even, maybe a little bit down. So take that for what you will. Elephant in the room, Jake. Chargers lose 29-22. Just going to put that out there. It doesn't matter, obviously. Final scores don't matter. Like, no one cares.
But there's always going to be the handful of people that care.
Yes.
And that will make
we love you
biggest
too.
deal about it too.
And we love you too. So offense, let's kind of go to offensive line for a second. We talked about receivers. We talked about Chase Young and Easton Stick. Both honestly, like, played pretty good. Okay. I think there were some positive and negatives from each. Weird Chase Daniel with the wheels. Did you see that 20-yard run or whatever it was? Like Isaiah Spiller was blocking for him. I'm like, who is this? Chase Daniel, Easton Stick. Chase Daniel does seem to have, I don't know if lost, but his velocity to the sidelines. You saw in a couple passes that he was trying to get to Josh Palmer.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't the best.
No. But in terms of managing the game, both he and Easton Stick did okay. There's that one crazy long drive by Easton Stick that was 15 plays, I think, going into the fourth quarter. Overall, did pretty good. So quarterback 2, 3, we could talk about it, but it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
I mean, again, to some people it matters, Dan. We talked about this on the live show. There is that contingency of people that believe that Easton Stick is that guy. And
do you?
I haven't thought that, but I will stand by this because I'm always one for owning my mistakes. Look, that game on Saturday was probably the best that I've ever seen Easton Stick look. And that's going all the way back. It was the good version. Yes, that was going all the way back to his preseason games as a rookie where he had that long run in for a touchdown that really started the fire about him. And I get it, but it is really funny, Dan. It's just that was not the Easton Stick that we have watched in training camp the last couple of weeks.
Nope.
But Easton Stick came to play, and I thought from an athletic standpoint, obviously he has an advantage over sure. Chase Daniel in that regard. But I thought as far as majority of his passes going through his progressions, I thought they were crisp. I thought they were on the money. I thought overall he played a very, very good game with all things considered. And again, you have that one interception at the end of the game, which was unfortunate because you actually felt okay, we're driving.
They're driving.
This is good.
Letty Brown season.
We could be seeing overtime in a preseason game, for God's sakes. So yeah, I mean, I thought, this is similar to the case of offensive or specifically right tackle, which we'll talk about it here in a second. But Easton Stick will probably get the nod to start this coming Saturday against the Cowboys. And this is how it'll rotate essentially for the last two games here between Chase Daniel and Easton Stick. And who knows? I mean, the expectation is that most people believe that the Chargers will once again keep all three quarterbacks. So I don't think that, even though it's not personally what I would do with my philosophy, I'd like to use that, I'd like to use those players elsewhere and in terms of overall depth, but that's the expectation. So we'll just see who ultimately ends up. Is there going to be a change at QB2 by the time preseason is done with? And this wasn't a bad start to that competition.
No. So let's get into the offensive line, Jake. So pass blocking, run blocking. I'm going to bring up some PFF stats, take them with a grain of salt. But I think it does help kind of, for the most part, show a trend. Brendan Hymus, Storm Norton, Zach Bailey, respectively. Those are the three highest pass blocking rates. 82.4 for Brendan Hymus, 79.6 for Storm Norton, and 76.8 for Zach Bailey, which I think the more telling number is looking at the other side. They have Jamari Salyer at a 53.2 pass block rate, which I don't agree with. And they had Trey Pipkins at a 34, which 34 compared to Storm Norton 79. That's a big discrepancy. They have Storm Norton 0 pressures, 0 hurries. They have Trey Pipkins with 1 hurry and 1 pressure. So that kind of tells you why. But overall, I think the offensive line did pretty good. I think we saw Zion Johnson look pretty darn good in pass protection, although they wouldn't say it, they being PFF. Weirdly, Jake, that had a 24.3 pass block rate for Zion Johnson. But what were your takeaways from the offensive line as a whole from a pass blocking perspective? Pass blocking, it make you feel better or worse?
Pass blocking, obviously it's not going to be immaculate. You're not going to get the same type of production that you would get with all of your ones in there. But I thought for having the playing time that Hymus got, with the fact that you have 2 rookies and Zion Johnson and Jamari Salyer in there, I thought they did very well. Foster Sorrell probably had the worst day of all the offensive linemen, considering the amount of pressures that he gave up. Again, I really enjoy PFF. I think a lot of the stuff that they do and they equate is on the money. I just still don't understand how they grade out offensive linemen like this. Just for context purposes, you can look at what they gave Trevor Penning, but then you could look at highlights of him just totally getting spun around and giving up a pressure there. And then just the scores just don't seem to add up, whether we're talking about that compared to Storm Norton or even Storm Norton compared to Trey Pipkins. Just if we're talking about one single pressure here. Mm-hmm. I don't get it. But
you're right. Foster Sorrell, 3 hurries, 5 pressures, not a good day.
Correct. So overall, majority of the offensive linemen I thought did a good job. Not perfect by any means, not elite by any means, but it's stuff that you can build on, stuff that the coaches are going to go back and watch film on. And hopefully, if we're talking about the likes of Solar, Hymas, and Zion Johnson here, that they're all going to feel the need to improve that. Now, what's the biggest thing that we're all looking at when it comes to the offensive lineman? Of course, that's right tackle. Good day for Storm Norton. You can't take anything away from him on that, even if we are talking about limited playing time.
And then a pretty good day for Pipkins too. I mean, it wasn't a bad day.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad day for either one of these guys. But now, much like the battle for QB 2 and 3, essentially, it's going to flip. So now, this next coming week, we'll see Trey Pipkins take the first snaps of the game, and then it'll switch back to Storm Norton. So again, we truly are not going to know what is going to happen at the right tackle position until probably the week before the regular season game. So hold tight, because we're not going to be getting any answers on that for anytime soon.
Yes, but promising wise, from a run blocking perspective, Jamari Salyer looked darn good. And I think he has the potential to be a starting guard quicker than I think folks would have thought. I could see him starting as quickly as like beginning of next season, in theory.
Apologies. My pronunciation of Sawyer's name keeps coming out incorrectly. So I'm sure that if people haven't hammered me by now, I will fix that. I promise.
It's okay, Jake. No one's judging. So Jamari Salyer looked pretty good. 82.1 run block grade on PFF. Zach Bailey actually looked pretty good as well from a run blocking perspective. Zion Johnson, I thought looked really good, although PFF would argue otherwise. But again, we don't understand PFF grades from
when it comes to offensive
linemen. But overall, I would say they look pretty good. And I think it's kind of a combination. I think you saw the run game kind of doing pretty well from an offensive line perspective, but also from a running back perspective. There is less dancing around in the backfield than we've seen in years past. And I think that is purposeful. Like I don't know this. I have no sources, but I'm wondering if that's like an emphasis from the running backs group of like enough of that, like just get down, get vertical. And so I like that. Even Spiller, like looking at his run attempts, he didn't have, I think, like 3.4 yards per carry, but the way he got them, that's what they got him for. Like they're not getting him to go get that, Tyreek Hill crazy play. Like they're there for the 4th and 1, 3rd and 2s, being able to kind of efficiently move the chains.
True. And let's also not forget this. That is not the offensive line that Isaiah Spiller will be running behind. So anybody that's even saying that Isaiah Spiller had a bad day, look at the full context of what you're looking at. Right, yes. One, that's false. And 2, look at the full context of what you're looking at. So I think given the circumstances and what he did in limited time and being able to show his versatility both in the run and the passing game, I thought he did a very good job behind that offensive line.
All right, so moving over to the defensive side, talked about Chris Rumph, had a pretty good day. Interior defensive line, I think honestly some of them had a good day. You saw Morgan Fox. I mean, that guy, I think Brandon Staley after the game kind of had him pegged as like one of those football playing Jessies. He had an interview with Matt Money and DJ, and he called him kind of a football playing Jesse and how much he impacts the game. You saw that immediately. Brandon Fehoko also, I thought, looked very good.
Keep it coming.
Christian Covington had some positive plays. You didn't see some positive plays from some other guys. Doesn't bode well. And like everyone talked about this needing to be the time that Jerry Tillery steps up. This is the time that he can make or break his roster spot. And to go ghost,
I mean,
that's not good.
Was there anything on the stat sheet for him? Because even looking through ESPN's full box score of this, he does not even come up on the stat sheet. I just wanted to make sure that I was double checking myself by looking at this, and I'm like, he didn't even register on the stat sheet.
He does not. 0 sacks, 0 hits, 0 hurries.
I mean, you said it best, and went ghost.
Now flip that. Like, you look at some of the other guys that were on the. Let's look at the interior perspective first. Like, we talked about Morgan Fox. Like, he looked good, and Morgan Fox, when they brought him in, he was the guy that they thought, like, that's probably going to be the one who ends up taking over for Jerry Tillery. And you kind of saw it. He had an 89.2 pass rush grade as an interior defensive lineman. You'll take that. 1 hit, 2 hurries, and 43% win rate. I'll take it. Cole Christensen actually had a pretty good day as well. Linebacker.
He had a good day.
So, yeah, it's not good. There was one, I don't know if you saw this, but Otito, 5th round draft pick, had 2 hurries. I think was he the one that got tackled by Egbele or vice versa when they were supposed to get a sack?
That knocked him out of the play?
Yes.
I thought he took out Rumph in that play.
I don't remember, but Otito definitely tackled someone that was not on the opposing team. But Fehoko looked really good. I think he had 7 pass rushes, I believe, which I was like, dang.
For a guy who is known best for his run block, his run blocking capabilities, as far as what he's done on the interior defensive line, going back last year, statistically, he was one of the better interior defensive linemen on this team when it came to run blocking.
Yes, and real quick, I misspoke. I did not mean Fehoko. I meant Egbele. Egbele had 7 hurries in this game. He's kind of all over the place, kind of had an up and down game, but Fehoko looked good, and you could tell there was an interior presence that there wasn't from other people. Just leave it there. So in terms of kind of what that interior defensive line looks like, or just defensive line in general, if Tillery was on the high end of that purely based off of precedence, purely based off of a 1st round draft pick, purely based on name, I don't know how he could still be there after that.
Fehoko has earned himself this roster spot. I don't care if we're talking about this game. I don't care if we're talking about the practices and training camp that we have seen him perform very well on. Even you going back to last year and looking at those stats, you're talking about a guy who has earned his way up. This is his opportunity to get more starting time, even with the rehaul that the Chargers essentially did in reshaping the interior of their defensive front. And he has gone out. And when you're talking about consistency, this guy is always at least making some type of play. And it may not be the flashiest play. You could have a pressure from him here and there, because I think that's definitely showed up in training camp, as his pass rushing skills have definitely improved. And especially when we're talking about stopping the run, that is his bread and butter. That's what he knows what to do. And I think for a key depth standpoint, and when you're talking about the philosophy that this team should be focusing on, especially based off of what they did last year and how they were just gashed by the run, someone with Fehoko's skill set is exactly what you need on this team. So to me, Dan, this is academic. If Fehoko is kept off this roster, whether it's for Jerry Tillery or anybody else,
I don't know how you can keep him off the roster.
I don't know how you can keep him off the field.
I don't know.
Baffling to me.
So in terms of hurries, you had Egbele, who had 7 hurries. You had Jamal Davis, another camp star, 4 hurries. You had Morgan Fox, 2 hurries. You had Otito with 2 hurries, and then Rumph, Christensen, Gaziano, and that's it. All had 1 hurry. So from a pass rush perspective, I think it was kind of the Egbele, Davis, and Chris Rumph show. That's kind of how I saw it. Linebacker,
it's a question mark right now. It's a question mark. It's not the best when you have 3 linebackers that lead your team in tackles, essentially, because that just meant that the Rams were getting whatever they wanted over the middle. So it's you got to look at the stats both ways, but still, to have Troy Reeder, I thought actually looked pretty darn good in certain situations.
I was impressed. I agree.
I liked the speed that he actually hit some of the holes with and coming up and making tackles. Damon Lloyd, again, this is what he belongs. This is what I want to see. And, let's take everything that we have seen and heard from training camp and let's adopt that into an actual game against a different opponent. And I thought he looked great. 2nd in the team in total tackles, but 5 total solo tackles. That led the team in that category. And then 1 tackle for a loss. I mean, I thought he looked great. And in a position right now where there's a bunch of question marks when it comes to depth, this is the type of player that you need. And hell, we didn't even get really a chance to see the coverage skills that he has shown in training camp in this game, because those skills are just as equally impressive as what he did in this game. So Damon Lloyd, great step for him in terms of making it difficult for this team to keep him off this roster.
Yes. Before we get into the secondary, which I know was a very hot button item, hot topic for lots of folks in this game. Jake, you know what position we didn't talk about in the offense was fullback.
Oh, yeah.
Xander Horvath sighting. 2 back-to-back plays. I believe the first one, he got tackled immediately, which caused them to have to go for it on 4th down, which I was actually surprised he didn't get the first down then. But then 4th and 1, fullback dive, he gets the first down.
Mm-hmm.
You'll take it. So the Xander group, they're probably ecstatic right now. You didn't really see much offensively anyways, other than that and pass blocking. So this is probably where I think there was the most, let's call it tribulation and trials.
That's a nice way to put it.
Was the Chargers secondary. And I think that you and I may have a differing viewpoint on this in terms of like what the takeaways are. So I'm gonna let you go first, Jake. So we saw Dean Leonard give up some plays, both on the 2-point conversion. I think he gave up 2 other catches that were pretty big. There's also some DPIs in there from him, Asante Samuel Jr. There's also there are 2 other DPIs as well. Defense in general, I think a lot of penalties, specifically from the secondary. There were some positives from there too, but I'll give you kind of the floor first. Like, what was your viewpoint on the overall performance of the secondary versus expectations? Again, we're talking about like 5th, 6th, 7th string.
Yes, that's what we're talking about here. To others, you just take it as a sign of this organization is trash, as what people would say. They don't know how to
should
draft
be fired.
properly. Screw those 7th round picks that are playing up against 3rd stringers in their first actual NFL game against somebody that they haven't played in practice for the past two and a half weeks. Whew. Bravo. Immaculate take. No, my takeaways, Dan, were just, look, it's nothing that can't be fixed. If you really thought that these guys were going to come out of the gate and be world beaters, you need to reevaluate the way that you're thinking about this defense. It's what I hearken it on is I thought, yes, it was a bad day for Leonard. Definitely not looking good, but it's nothing that couldn't be fixed. If we're talking about him getting burned for, which obviously he definitely had some bad moments where he was out of position in this game. He got beat on that long 60-yard touchdown that ended up happening. Had a couple of pass interference penalties where literally he was right in. Okay,
hold on. I would push back. I don't think he was really out of position, and I think that was kind of the thing.
That's what I was saying. He wasn't necessarily out of position. His coverage was great. It was just a simple thing of, if you get your head around, okay, that call may not end up happening. So it would be more concerning to me. Right. It would be more concerning to me if he's 5 to 10 yards off the opposing wide receiver and getting beat, as opposed to a play like that on the sidelines where, yes, it may seem like the most trivial and fundamental thing to do, to just do this and maybe not get flagged for it. But what I also thought, Dan, is I hearkened back to defensive coordinator Ronaldo Hill when he was speaking about guys like Dean Leonard, guys like Jasir Taylor. He's talked about, they haven't been a straight line throughout practices. I know for Dean Leonard, he started off very, very hot when training camp got underway. But what has he talked about? He's talked about when these guys fail, they respond. They come back and they respond.
They don't back down.
So yes, not a good sign. Not the best of days for Dean Leonard coming out of the chute, but let's see how the next week goes and the next week goes.
Yeah, and I think that kind of bodes true for a lot of the guys on defense. You could talk about Dean Leonard in that category. You could talk about JT Woods in that category, Brandon Sebastian in that category. I will say, I think like Jasir Taylor, Keeman Hall, both had pretty good days. But like, I think the thing to remember, and this is where I kind of felt a little optimistic. Like, yes, you don't like to see your corners give up 60-yard touchdowns, and you don't like to see your corners give up DPIs, Asante Samuel Jr. included. But what you do like is that, I think Brandon Staley talked about it post-game. He talked about the fact that although they gave up penalties and gave up catches, the thing that he liked was the fact that they were in phase, which I believe means like they were there in position to make the play. They weren't getting beat physically.
Right.
It almost was like they were kind of getting beat mentally. And the hard part, they got figured out. Like, it's not easy to athletically stay with the receiver through the entire route tree. The easy part is, hey, when you get to that catch point, when you get to the point of conflict, turn around. Because that's the part that is somewhat simple. The fundamental part is simple. Like, you can't teach athleticism. You can't teach getting a guy to cover well, which I think they did do well. And so I noticed, like, every time I was seeing a Dean Leonard pass either completed or pass interference, I'm like, man, that was a crazy catch. But, like, he was there. Like, if he just turned around, like, that would have been a PBU or interception possibly. So I kind of was feeling a little optimistic in terms of, like, the overall big picture of what you would get from Dean Leonard. I think Jazir Taylor played pretty good in the slot. I think there was one part, I think it was Jazir Taylor and one other person who there was that third and goal, I believe it was. And they had the run stop by, I think Rose was their running back. They had a run stop, and then they both basically missed the tackle, and he ended up turning around and getting in for a touchdown. Fundamentals, again, got to be able to wrap up. But, like, generally speaking, like, to put it in perspective, guys, we're talking about a 7th-round draft pick, UDFAs, 6th-round picks. There's a reason why these guys were 6th, 7th, and UDFAs. If they were 7th-round draft picks and they're balling out, beating your 2s and 3s, like, they wouldn't have been drafted in the 7th round. Like, there's a reason for that. And so you're looking at progression, you're looking at it on a whole. Getting out there and getting snaps is kind of what you need to see.
Yeah, I think if you were to summarize the biggest negative that needs to be worked on, and we're talking about through the entirety of the defense here, we're not singling out anybody and saying this, and unfortunately, this is a phrase that we have heard too much about over the last couple of seasons: missed tackles. Now, just be happy that we're talking about preseason here, so hopefully you can correct these things moving forward in the next couple of weeks. But Dan, that was evident throughout the game on defense. Not picking on any one individual player, not picking on any one individual position. That was evident throughout. That's probably the one biggest takeaway that I would say, okay, if there is a key area for improvement that I want to see a dramatic jump in over the next 2 weeks, that has to be it.
Yeah. And to that point, Emeka Egbule, 3 missed tackles. Troy Reader, 2 missed tackles. Chris Rumph had a missed tackle. Raheem Lane had a missed tackle. Brandon Sebastian had a missed tackle. Jamal Davis had a missed tackle. And I honestly think there was more. I think that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
It felt like it.
There was more than that. There was more than that. So that has to get fixed. And some of those missed tackles led directly to points. Like I think it was Egbule and Chris Rumph both had a missed tackle on the same play, which led to their quarterback scrambling out, getting a first down, and then a few plays later gets a touchdown.
Or simply not getting off the field and allowing a drive to keep going.
Yeah, so that's important. We can't finish the episode, Jake, without talking about special teams. And I thought this was
something that you have taken great pride in over the last month, essentially.
And not just hang time. Come on now, we're not going just operational stopwatches. But we'll start there. Sure. There's a few times where you noticed there was like kick catch interference called on the Chargers, or it was like very close. There was something that looked strange, and you're wondering like, oh, what is the gunner doing? Why is he doing that? And then you realize like, well, it's because the ball's been up in the air for 47 seconds. And so what else is he supposed to do?
He almost timed it perfectly. Timed it perfectly.
What does that say when you can have kick catch interference?
I mean, one, you have to show a little bit more discipline on your coverage unit. Okay, yes, but to your point, I see what it is you're trying to do. You're allowing what it is. It's allowing your guys to get down there to make the play, to make the stop, to make the tackle. That's what that hang time is doing. Yes. So, I mean, very impressive. What was it, Dan? 4.87?
4.87
is what it was for J.K. Scott?
4 punts. And in comparison, I think Ty Long was like what? I think he was 4.2 average.
I don't know what it was.
That's over half a second difference.
When you
now,
see
will
how
he
hang
sustain
time,
this? I don't know.
Right. But when you see how hang time ultimately translates to its contribution in the coverage unit, yes, obviously coverage unit takes a hell of a lot more discipline and aspects to beat your guy down the field to make a play, but a hang time has a little bit to do with it as well. So let's not negate the relationship between the two. So I get it. And from a special team standpoint, outside of that one little misfire on the early tackle before the opposing receiver caught it.
From a 5+ second hang time kick. Okay.
Right. I was okay with it.
Yeah, I agree. No missed extra points, no missed field goals. So that's the non-story. We'll take it. It was kind of interesting to see kind of the folks on special teams, like Joe Reed got a lot of run at kick returner, and there weren't any negative plays. There was one where he probably could have gotten more on a return, but overall, pretty chalk. We didn't see any crazy punt returns. That was pretty normal. But I would say J.K. Scott probably the winner of special teams day. Otherwise, big picture. Anything else from a takeaway perspective? I think we thankfully got out of it without any injuries, which I think is like, in terms of priorities, like 1A, 1B performance and health.
That should be everyone's mentality at this point of the year. I don't care if someone beats us down 34-0, as long as nobody's getting injured in the process. That's really all I care about.
Yep. JT Woods, I think, had a little bit of an up and down day, which I think is to be expected. I think the things that he's good at, you saw. I think the things that he needs improvement on, you also saw.
Yes.
Whether it was angles, whether it was tackling. But like the click and close was pretty good. But overall, I would say the folks who won the day, Jake, it seemed like, I think, all rookies played. And for the most part, you saw Zion Johnson as advertised. You saw Isaiah Spiller as advertised. JT Woods, for good or for bad, as advertised. Otito, I think, looked pretty good, didn't look bad. Dean Leonard, 7th-round draft pick. Brandon Sebastian, those guys, not great, but also you can't really rely on your 6th and 7th round draft picks to like all of a sudden make this squad, especially this squad with a secondary that is this deep. But overall, I think the rookies played pretty good. And if you can go back-to-back years, Jake, having rookie impact like we did last year with the Asante Samuel Jr.'s and the Rashawn Slaters and the come on.
Who are you talking about? Honestly.
The
Neiman?
Nick Neiman. There we go. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. If you can get impact from rookies back-to-back years like that, like that's what makes a roster title contending. You have to be able to get performance and production out of those guys. So I think kind of the big stories, rookies got a lot of playing time, got to see a lot of performance from the guys who you expect to make impacts on the team.
Yep.
Again, from the guys you expect to make impacts on the team. You saw. And then otherwise, I think it's got to be Michael Bandy. It's got to be Chris Rumph.
Joshua Kelly,
Isaiah Spiller. That's probably kind of the 4 main takeaways from and maybe Jamari Salyer as well. I would put him there too. I think he was drafted way later than I think folks thought he would get drafted, and you're seeing why. Like he looked pretty good. He doesn't look like someone who's drafted late rounds.
If we're looking at, and however you want to rate them on your own, by all means do. 2 of the key positions that is really vying for a roster spot, a potential wide receiver 6. The guys that we wanted to show out for that, they both did it in Bandy and Reed. Brennan Fehoko, who to me should, no question, be making this roster. But for whatever case, if some people want to say he's still on the outside looking in, it shouldn't be that way. His roster spot should be solidified. And personally, that should have happened like a couple weeks ago, in my opinion. But I'm glad that he got that opportunity to prove what he can do. And hopefully that continues moving forward and gets him his deserved roster spot. Joshua Kelly, we've all been wondering who the hell is going to take up this mantle on RB3. I think Joshua Kelly, when we said it on Saturday, he had the lead, not by much. I think he widened that gap considerably.
Really?
Yes, I do. If we're talking about the difference between him, Larry Roundtree, Kevin Marks, and Letty Brown, yes, as of this moment right now, he has He's got that RB.
Yeah, RB2. So you're saying RB2 Spiller, RB3 Kelly?
RB2, yes. RB2, I think we would figure is still going to be Spiller. If we're talking about RB3, I think Kelly has a firm grip on that right now.
Yes, and I think from there's a pretty wide gap between RB3 and the rest.
Yes.
And I honestly don't even know if I would have Roundtree as RB4. I don't know. I think all of that's kind of a toss-up.
Dan, tell me right now, would you rather keep a Damon Lloyd or a Brendan Fehoko on this team over an RB4?
Yes. In a heartbeat.
There you go.
Yep. Yeah. So no, overall, I would say it was a success in terms of preseason week 1. A lot of these guys got to play, got to have meaningful snaps. I guess maybe the last question I have for you, Jake, maybe this would be a good way to end this. Were there any questions that we had going into preseason week 1 that were now like answered? I think for me, what comes top of mind, a lot of questions, a lot of hype around Chris Rumph. I think that was answered. I think we saw some juice from him. Same thing with Brandon Fehoko. I think we saw like some juice for that. And then Isaiah Spiller, again, I know it was not a ton, but what you saw from him in terms of just the eye test, he belongs. He bounces forward. He doesn't lose yards often. And
I'll be interested to see when he gets carries against the Cowboys and give it behind. Let's see if they flip it. Let's see if Kelly did a great job against the Rams and getting the first carries of the game. Let's see if they give Isaiah Spiller a chance to run between, with the number 2s essentially. And let's see if the production continues, because personally, I think it would.
Yeah, I'd agree. So what answers or what questions did you get answers to?
I mean, I think it's kind of an answer and a question both at the same time, because there really is. It hasn't been answered yet, but should the Chargers keep 6 wide receivers on this roster? There's a very good case to why they should, and it's being known right now between Joe Reed and Michael Bandy. So we'll see if that battle plays out the same way. If one guy is able to pull away in that position battle, I don't know, but it sure as hell makes it entertaining, and it makes it hard to not keep either one of these guys on this roster.
Okay, so let me ask this then, because I think it's easy to, I shouldn't say easy, but like there's one conversation of who would you rather have between Michael Bandy and Joe Reed. Like that's an isolated, which that's an argument in itself. But when you get to the question of who would you rather have between whoever that is and Damon Lloyd, it's tough.
It's tough. And I think if I was to have him to make a choice right now, when you look at the scope of the roster buildup as it stands, I'm not going to back off what I have said for the last several months in looking at the depth at linebacker is arguably the weakest position on this team. Mm-hmm. So given that, and given the fact that you have Tranquil finally, thankfully, coming back from injury, you've had Kyle Van Noy stepping in at that inside linebacker spot, maybe temporarily, maybe permanently, we'll find out. But Kenneth Murray still coming back from injury, and that's a big question mark going into this season. And then you have the likes of Troy Reader and a handful of others. And we know that just from a standpoint, this defensive scheme does not value the linebacker position that much. But when you look at the injuries that have already taken place there, can you risk not having that depth? Can you risk keeping the likes of Damon Lloyd off this team, given what he's given you in one preseason game, in several training camp practices? If that was my choice that I had, unfortunately, I'd have to say Damon Lloyd, because that's where the need is more.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I think the simple reasoning for it is when I look at potential production from that roster spot of either wide receiver 6 or linebacker, whatever number it is, you'll see Damon Lloyd filtering through that defense with way more meaningful snaps than he will whatever wide receiver 6 gets. And so in terms of the impact to the roster, impact to the team, I think goes Damon Lloyd. Last question, and I'm asking this for everyone. As we get to joint practice with the Cowboys, as we get to week 2 preseason against the Cowboys, Jake, listeners, viewers, who is now firmly we talk about hot takes, cold beer. Who is in the hot seat on this Chargers team? It could be one player, it could be a few, but who is now firmly in the hot seat as we get to week 2?
Well, we've already kind of alluded to the person that's in the hot seat. It's definitely Jerry Tillery. He has to be at the top of that list.
That's one. Larry Roundtree, I think, is another
Larry
one.
Roundtree would be another one, yes. It's interesting, the battle in the secondary, because Alohi Gilman, since he's been getting more reps with Mark Webb out due to injury during training camp practices, he didn't blow the roof off of getting his opportunity, but I thought he actually played pretty well during those camp reps and elevated himself a little bit more. So we'll really see over these next 2 weeks. I think that's a battle. I still just can't see them getting rid of Mark Webb, given the things that the coaching staff has said and how they've alluded to the expectations that they had for him last year before the injury. It's hard for me to say that he would be on the hot seat, but maybe, Dan, maybe it'll be interesting for these guys like the Raheem Lanes, the Brandon Sebastians, even between Lloyd and Jasir Taylor, because the big question is how many defensive backs are you going to keep as a group? And that's a tough one, given how much you have with this competition of young guys that have come in and that are battling for a roster spot. Those would probably be the ones that I would fixate on. Dan, here's probably the better prop bet to ask for this coming game. Are you ready for this? Will the Dallas Cowboys have more penalties called on them, or will the Chargers have more missed tackles? What will be the greater number?
Ooh.
Penalties from the Cowboys or missed tackles from the Chargers?
Would they have like 17 penalties?
17 penalties. Skip Bayless said he counted 22. 5 of them weren't called. So
for reference, the Chargers seemed like they had a ton of penalties. They had 9. So imagine almost doubling that.
Yes. So more penalties from the Cowboys or more missed tackles from the Chargers?
I'm going to go more penalties from the Cowboys. I'm going to parlay that with more carries for Isaiah Spiller than Joshua Kelly. Jake, anything else you want to tell the great friends other than to go to LAFB Network, go to the shop, use the promo code Unleashed, get your 4th and Staley shirt, get your 4th and Staley hat. You can get your rally towels. You can get your I'm Not Effing Tired by Joey Bosa.
Yep. Last call. Isaiah Spiller signed mini helmet giveaway taking place tomorrow. One last opportunity to get in there and enter yourself in the contest. Make sure to follow the rules. We've tweeted it a million times now, so just go to the Chargers handle, follow the rules, make sure you're entered in that. And then again, as we alluded to on the live show on Saturday, if you don't get this one, don't fret, because there are plenty more giveaways to come that we might end up putting out later on this week. So
maybe
keep your eyes peeled.
Yes. Last thing on that, Jake, speaking of keeping your eyes peeled, the Chargers equipment room, the shop that they had over at SoFi, they got some nice swag for this year that's new. I got myself a sick hoodie. I think I tweeted about it on Saturday. It's kind of pricey, but I was like, I can't not. I have to. So we definitely will be having some giveaways to kind of help folks take advantage of some of the new swag we got, both from the store as well as that we have here. Again, Isaiah Spiller mini helmet up for grabs. You have until, I think today's last day, isn't it?
Today's the last day.
Today's the last day. So go have your chance to win that helmet. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Chargers lose 29-22, but they win in lots of things that they have been able to take advantage of. Health being one of them, reps being another one, and rookie performances being another. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to Chargers Unleashed. You can find Jake Hefner, backwards hat, at Jake Z. Hefner, myself at Dan W. Sports, and we'll talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed.